For years, people have opened Google Earth. They've zoomed in on some strange corner of the planet and found a blur where a place should be. Some of the most mysterious places on Earth aren't actually hidden anymore. You can see them today. The island, the antenna field, the white domes in the desert, a runway in Nevada. The pixels are there. The mystery survived anyway. Tonight, 5 places people say Google Earth doesn't want you to see. First, an island that looks like paradise, until you realize that paradise has been telling us to leave for more than 100 years. At first glance, North Sentinel Island looks like paradise. White beaches with thick jungles surrounding water so clear that you can see the coral reef from space. It also happens to be one of the few places on Earth where the answer to every outsider has been the same: no. Not because nobody found the island, because everybody did, and the people living there kept refusing company. But that's the first thing the documentaries get wrong. North Sentinel Island isn't isolated because it's hidden. It's isolated because the Sentinelese, the tribe that lives there, decided it would stay isolated. And that decision may have started nearly 150 years ago. In 1880, British naval officer Maurice Vidal Portman landed on the island. He wasn't there to make peace, he was there to study the people. Before he left, he kidnapped 6 of them, 2 adults and 4 children. The adults died within days from diseases they'd never encountered. The children were eventually returned to the island carrying gifts. If you've ever wondered why North Sentinel has spent generations driving outsiders away, this is probably where the story begins. Because for decades afterward, almost every approach ended the same way. Boats would appear, people stepped onto the beach, bows came up, and visitors were turned away. Then something unexpected happened. In 1991, an Indian contact team approached the island carrying coconuts. This time, nobody fired. The Sentinelese walked into the water and accepted the coconuts by hand. One man even came close enough to the boat that researchers believed history might finally be changing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. A few minutes later, the Sentinelese began signaling that the visit was over. No shouting, no attack, but a message that was clear enough that you've come too far. That tiny moment changes the entire story. The Sentinelese aren't hiding. They are making decisions. Who can come close, how close, and when it's time to leave. Then, nature tested that decision. In 2004, one of the deadliest tsunamis in recorded history rolled directly across the Andaman Islands. More than 200,000 people died. For days, nobody knew whether North Sentinel still existed. An Indian helicopter flew over looking for survivors, and a man walked onto the beach, raised a bow, and fired an arrow at the helicopter. Well, the Sentinelese, they were alive, and they still wanted to be left alone. Most stories end there, but this one doesn't. In 2018, American missionary John Allen Chau hired fishermen to take him to the island illegally. He knew he might die. He wrote about this in his journal. One entry described a failed visit, and as he approached, the Sentinelese began firing, and an arrow struck directly across his Bible. He retreated to the fishermen who brought him to the island to regroup, and then went to make one final visit. The next morning, fishermen watched from offshore as the Sentinelese dragged his lifeless body across the beach. It was a tragedy, but it's also exactly what the island had warned would happen for decades. Surely now, after worldwide headlines, this would be the end. It wasn't. In 2025, another American illegally landed on North Sentinel. This time, he reportedly left 2 gifts, a coconut and a can of Diet Coke. Think about that image for a second. One of the last isolated societies on Earth, standing on a beach next to a can of Diet Coke. That's not just strange, it's the entire modern world crashing into one shoreline. People call North Sentinel the world's most isolated island, and at one point, it was. But I don't think that's true today. It's one of the world's most connected. Satellites photograph it, governments patrol it, news organizations write about it. Millions of people know exactly where it is, and almost nobody is allowed to step ashore. The mystery survives satellites because the real barrier was never distance, it was consent. Drive a few hours into the Alaskan wilderness and you'll eventually find a field of steel. 180 antennas, perfectly arranged, all pointing toward the sky. From above, it doesn't look like a science experiment. It looks like the kind of place conspiracy theories are built around. This is HAARP. Officially, it's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Its job is surprisingly simple. The sole focus of HAARP is to study the ionosphere. The ionosphere is an invisible layer around 60 miles high above Earth that helps radio signals travel around the planet. It affects GPS, satellites, military communications, even the northern lights. It's real and it's important, and almost nobody ever thinks about it. That turns out to be the perfect recipe for a mystery, because if something strange happens, people naturally blame the thing they don't understand. A military-funded facility in Alaska using high-frequency radio waves to heat part of the upper atmosphere. Read that sentence without context. It already sounds like the beginning of a conspiracy documentary. But then you find the patent. In 1985, physicist Bernard Eastlund filed one with a title conspiracy researchers have quoted ever since. Method and apparatus for altering a region in the Earth's atmosphere, ionosphere, and magnetosphere. Not studying, altering. One word changed everything. Now the question wasn't what is HAARP, it becomes what if it actually works? Could it change the weather, trigger earthquakes, control mines? Scientists say no, and the NOAA says HAARP can't control hurricanes or earthquakes because it simply doesn't have that kind of power. But here's the part I think matters more. Almost nobody reading arguments about HAARP has ever studied the ionosphere. Most people hear heating the atmosphere with radio waves and stop there. Because the ionosphere really is strange. It's an invisible ocean of charged particles floating hundreds of miles above us. Radio waves bounce through it, solar storms disturb it. Military communication, well, they depend on it. The real science is already weird enough. HAARP never needed to be a weather machine. Reality gave us something almost as mysterious. North Sentinel stayed mysterious because the outside world wasn't welcome. HAARP stayed mysterious because the outside world got an answer, and we decided it wasn't enough. Our next stop proves there's another way a mystery can survive, not by hiding the truth, by teaching everyone to pretend they don't know it. Drive through the Dutch countryside and Volkel Air Base doesn't look unusual. Runways, hangars, open farmland. If you didn't know where you were, you'd probably keep driving, which is exactly what makes this interesting. Because beneath some of those ordinary aircraft shelters, many experts believe American nuclear weapons have been sitting for decades. This is Volkel Air Base, and unlike most secrets in this episode, this one was never really hidden. It was simply never acknowledged. The story begins during the Cold War. NATO had a problem. If war broke out in Europe, American nuclear weapons needed to be close enough to the matter. So the United States created a system called nuclear sharing. The bombs stayed under American control, but they were stored inside allied countries. The Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Turkey, this list is getting scary. Countries without their own nuclear weapons suddenly had nuclear missions waiting beneath their runways. At Volkel, those weapons were believed to be B-61 nuclear bombs, not sitting inside some giant underground bunker, hidden beneath ordinary aircraft shelters. Inside vaults built directly into the floor. Picture a fighter jet parked in its hangar. Everything looks routine until the floor opens. A steel vault rises from beneath the concrete, and suddenly that ordinary hangar becomes part of a nuclear war plan. That's the first thing most people never realize. The secret wasn't buried inside of a mountain. It was buried beneath places that looked completely normal. For years, journalists, researchers, and even former officials all pointed to the same conclusion. American nuclear weapons were stored at Volkel. Every time the government was asked, the response never changed. We can neither confirm nor deny. It's one of the most famous phrases in government history because it answers the question without answering the question. Then in 2013, something unusual happened. the former Dutch Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers decided to stop playing along. In an interview, he casually stated there were 22 American nuclear bombs at Volkel. He even referred to them as those silly things. It's a bizarre phrase, maybe the strangest description ever given to nuclear weapons. And suddenly, the Dutch government had a problem. If they denied Lubbers, they would be calling their own former prime minister a liar. If they confirmed him, decades of official ambiguity would disappear overnight. So they chose a third option. No confirmation, no denial. The story simply kept moving. That might be the most fascinating part of Volkel. The secret survived because everyone understood the rules. Then came the leak that nobody could have predicted. Not a spy, not a whistleblower, but flashcards. In 2021, investigators discovered personnel connected to nuclear security had been using public study apps to memorize procedures, the same kind of apps students use before an exam. Some of those flashcards reportedly included information about security procedures, vault layouts, and access protocols. Think about that. Governments spent decades protecting one of NATO's worst kept secrets, and someone accidentally posted pieces of it online while preparing for a test. That's modern secrecy. You can build reinforced vaults, guard every entrance, refuse to answer questions for 60 years, then lose part of the mystery to Quizlet. And Volkel isn't frozen in history. The bombs are believed to be modernizing. The aircraft have changed. The Netherlands now fly F-35s. Reports of suspicious drone activity around European military sites have brought renewed attention to places like Volkel. The Cold War ended, the missions didn't. That's why Volkel belongs on this list. Not because it's the world's biggest secret, because it may be the world's most politely ignored one. Our next stop asks an even bigger question. What happens when a country starts wondering whether its own government knows the whole story? And when you ask where the real story is, it's in the country down under. Fly over central Australia and the landscape is endless. It's red earth, empty horizon, there's nothing for hundreds of miles. Then out of nowhere, white domes appear in the desert. Perfect spheres, too many to ignore. This is Pine Gap. Officially, it's a joint Australian-American space research facility. That description is technically true, it just leaves out almost everything that matters. Because Pine Gap didn't become one of the world's most important intelligence bases by studying space. It became one of the places where modern wars are quietly connected together. Satellites collect missile launches, radar emissions, military communications, electronic signals from across huge parts of the planet, and much of that information flows through Pine Gap. The base doesn't just watch the world, it helps interpret it. That's the first surprise. Pine Gap isn't hidden, it's one of the most visible secrets in Australia. Then the story stops being about intelligence and starts becoming about politics. In 1972, Gough Whitlam became Prime Minister of Australia. He believed something simple. If a secret military facility operated on Australian soil, Australia should know exactly what happened inside of it. Whitlam started asking questions. Who controlled Pine Gap? Was the CIA involved? What agreements existed behind closed doors? Now, the more he asked, the more resistance he seemed to encounter. That's when Pine Gap becomes something much bigger than a spy story. It becomes a sovereignty story, because the question wasn't simply, what does the space do? It became, can a country fully control itself if its biggest secret belongs to someone else? 3 years later, Australia entered one of the greatest constitutional crises in its history, on November 11th, 1975. On November 11, 1975, Governor General Sir John Kerr dismissed Whitlam from office. No election, no public vote, just one signature. Crazy. A sitting prime minister was gone in a single afternoon. Australians still call it the dismissal to this day. Whitlam questioned Pine Gap. The United States considered Pine Gap one of its most strategically essential places on Earth. The base agreement was approaching renewal. Then Whitlam was removed. It doesn't prove a conspiracy, it explains why the question never disappeared. Most Cold War installations slowly faded into history. Pine Gap became even more important. They got new satellites, there were new conflicts, new technologies. New wars fought with intelligence instead of armies crossing borders. Researchers have linked Pine Gap to missile warning systems, signal intelligence, and intelligence that supports modern military operations, including drone missions across the globe. Sometimes the most valuable weapon is information: a phone location, a radar signal, a pattern, a confirmation of the pattern. If Pine Gap helps provide those, then it isn't simply watching history, it's helping shape it. That's the second perspective shift. People imagine Pine Gap as a giant listening station. It may be more accurate to think of it as a decision-making station. Today, the base continues to expand. There's more antennas, more infrastructure, the capability is endless. Because the world has changed. How much of a democracy can operate behind closed doors before the public starts wondering who is really making the decisions? Sometimes a mystery survives because nobody can agree where national security ends and political power begins. In the Nevada desert, there's a dry lake bed called Groom Lake. There's a long runway, warning signs, and it's a restricted airspace. There's no visitors, there's no tours. This is Area 51. And despite everything you've heard, the story doesn't begin with aliens. It begins with airplanes. In the 1950s, the CIA needed a place to test the U-2 spy plane. It could fly higher than almost any aircraft on Earth. Higher than commercial jets, military fighters, higher than anything the public had ever seen before. At sunset, something strange happened. The ground was already dark, but the U-2 was still catching sunlight miles above the Earth. People looked up and saw bright silver objects moving across a black sky. They reported UFOs, and they weren't imagining things. They really were seeing something extraordinary. They just weren't supposed to know what it was. The CIA compared UFO reports with U-2 flight logs. They knew what people were seeing. But telling the public about a top secret reconnaissance aircraft isn't an option. So, we got the other explanations. Atmospheric effects, reflections, optical illusions. The public saw the future of aviation, but the government told them they'd probably just seen the weather. Then the aircraft became even stranger. The A-12 Oxcart, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 Nighthawk. Each one looked less like yesterday's airplanes and more like tomorrow's. If you saw one of these things crossing the desert in the 1960s, what would you have called it? Because that's when Area 51 stopped becoming a military base and it became a myth factory. Because if witnesses say they saw aliens, nobody asks about a classified aircraft. Area 51 never needed flying saucers. It had airplanes people didn't have words for yet. Then in 1989, everything changed. A man named Bob Lazar appeared on Las Vegas television. He claimed he hadn't worked on secret aircraft. He claimed he worked on something far stranger. Alien technology, gravity propulsion, a hidden facility called S4, a mysterious fuel connected to element 115, an element that didn't exist. His education, his employment, everything about Bob Lazar became fiercely disputed. Supporters argued details of his story later proved accurate. Critics point to major inconsistency. More than 30 years later, people still argue about Bob Lazar, and that's exactly why he matters. Not because everyone believes him, because he permanently changed the conversation. Before Lazar, Area 51 was mostly associated with classified aircraft and UFO rumors. After Lazar, it became the place where people believed the government might be hiding humanity's biggest secret. Whether Bob Lazar told the truth, mixed truth with fiction, or built an unforgettable story from fragments, he changed the mythology forever. Then, another Area 51 story began to unfold. Former workers began claiming they had been exposed to hazardous materials while working at the base. They developed illnesses, filed lawsuits, and continued to push for questions to be answered. The government responded the same way it has for decades: secrecy. Not because of aliens, but because of classified programs. And that's one of the saddest parts of the Area 51 story. While the world searched for extraterrestrials, real people were trying to prove what happened to them behind those fences. The legend became so large it almost buried the human story underneath it. Then, in 2013, the government finally acknowledged what millions of people already believed. The CIA, for the first time in human history, officially recognized Area 51 and declassified documents connected to the U-2 program. The base was real, the aircraft were real, the secrecy was real, and many UFO reports really had been connected to classified flights. That should have ended the mystery. It strengthened it. Because people learned an important lesson. Sometimes the government really does hide extraordinary things, just not always the extraordinary things people imagine. New aircraft are almost certainly still being tested. It's more than likely that the aircraft flying there today won't be publicly acknowledged for years to come. The cycle, it continues. Someone sees something, someone reports it, somebody laughs. Someone files the report away, and then a decade later, the truth quietly arrives. Area 51 isn't the story of alien spacecraft, it's the story of what happens when the truth arrives just a little too late. Because once people stop trusting the explanation, they start writing their own. That's why every other place in this episode ultimately points us here. North Sentinel showed us that a mystery can survive because refused contact. HAARP showed us mysteries can grow when knowledge becomes too technical to explain. Volkel showed us that silence can become policy. Pine Gap shows us that secrecy can become power. Area 51 shows something different. Sometimes the cover story becomes more powerful than the truth. And once that happens, the myth, it no longer needs protecting, it protects itself. At the beginning of this episode, it looked like we were talking about 5 places on a map. If you didn't know then, we aren't. We were talking about 5 ways a mystery can outlive the truth. Because here's the strange thing. We've mapped the planet. We've filled the sky with satellites. Besides the ocean. But we've built cameras powerful enough to read a license plate from orbit. We've digitalized archives, declassified documents, connected billions of people with a device that fits in a pocket. And somehow, the world hasn't become less mysterious. It has become more mysterious. Because mystery was never created by empty spaces on the map. It was created by the spaces between what we know and what we believe and what we can actually prove. Sometimes the truth is hidden, sometimes it's ignored, classified, and most of the times it's misunderstood. But sometimes it's sitting in plain sight while everyone argues about something else. That is why these stories survive. Not because they're all true, not because they're all false, because every generation inherits the same instinct. When we find a locked door, we want to know what's behind it. Maybe that's why we've always told stories about forbidden islands, secret bases, hidden archives, and lights in the sky. Not because we're chasing answers, because we're wired to chase questions. And maybe that's the real mystery, not what's hiding out there, but why curiosity has always been one of the most human things about us. So the next time you zoom in on a blurry corner of a map or hear a story everyone says can't possibly be true, don't ask yourself, do I believe it? Ask a different question. Why has this story survived? Because sometimes that answer is even more interesting. And here at Hollow County, we're going to keep asking that question. I'll see you next Tuesday.